the way that I write is that this is going to sound very out there, but once I get into a story, I basically, it's not like I hear a voice, but I'm sort of just like writing, like automatic writing a voice, you know? And so when I didn't know what I was writing, but I just wrote this, and she said, you have heard this story before. I was there when this happened. I was there when that happened, and it was all about, you know, the shoe on the staircase, and all these different fairy tales, not just Rapunzel. It was like I was there when all this stuff happened, but it's all wrong. Like the way that it came down, everything has. It's been a. She didn't, you know, she wouldn't use the phrase telephone game, but she was saying that, right?
Want to listen to this episode ad free? Head on over to our Patreon. That's patreon.com/ Ivory Tower Boiler Room. For a limited time, we are offering free 1 week trials to our Patreon just so you can see all of the exciting audio and video episodes that you get to unlock as a Patreon member. And as an ITBR professor member, which is $10 a month, you receive access not only to our audio and video episodes, but also our monthly book club. This month, we are reading the Book of Gothel, a retelling of Rapunzel through the witch's eyes by Mary McMyne. Join us virtually on July 21st at 5 p.m. If you have any questions, please reach out to me at ivorytowerboilerroom@gmail.com. Please rate and subscribe to the podcast on Apple or Spotify. And please mention the podcast to one of your friends. It really helps get the word out there, and it allows me to continue getting really exciting guests, Mary to continue her True Crime and Academia show, and Christian Garcia to continue to co-host our rewatch show, whether it be Smash or Queer as Folk. And we are now on YouTube, so you can listen to the podcast on YouTube. So if you're a YouTube lover, we have you covered there as well. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Andrew Rimby, and welcome back to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. I'm really excited because I'm wearing my Hocus Pocus sweatshirt in honor of this occasion and my Ivory Tower Boiler Room hat because I realized that towers are very important in today's conversation. So a little branding opportunity. I'm joined with the author Mary McMyne, who is a novelist, poet, and former English professor. Okay, we have a little affiliation there, who is fascinated with the stories behind stories and the portrayal of women in history, folklore, and literature. I'll talk all about her breakout debut novel, but she actually has a forthcoming novel that we'll have to talk about, Mary, called A Rose by Any Other Name. The story behind Shakespeare's sonnets from the perspective of the Dark Lady. Her poetry chapbook, Wolfskin, won the Elgin Chapbook Award. She is a graduate of the New York University MFA program, received the Faulkner Wisdom Prize for a novel in progress, and a grant from the Sustainable Arts Foundation. She is also the poetry editor for Enchanted Living. Very aptly titled. Welcome to the ITBR, Mary.
Thank you for having me. It's going to be fun.
So, your breakout novel, very magically raved and reviewed, especially by Gregory Maguire, who we love here, said that you are a magician. So, I think that's a lot to live up to, but I do understand where he comes from with that description because once you dig into the Book of Gothel, which we are here to talk all about, Memoir of a Witch, it really does have like a Maguire vibe to it. It was reminding me a lot of Confessions of an Ugly Stepsister, but I feel like there's so much nuance that you're bringing to bear, like Gregory Maguire, with his novels. So I'm just curious, um, are you a I know you're a fan of Gregory Maguire, but like, had you read a lot of his books even before writing the Book of Gothel?
Oh yeah, yeah. I discovered Wicked in an airport when I was about I 16 or 17 or 18, something like that. And I proceeded to devour it and not do the things I was supposed to do when I got where I got. And I just kind of fell in love with his work. And then read everything that he had written up to that point, or maybe it was a couple years later. And I I really love retellings in general, so that was why I picked it up. But yeah, his work was is really inspiring to me, and my editor sent him an email out of the blue, like we didn't know him or anything. And when he wrote back he was like, no, yeah, I don't even do blurbs, but you could send me one just in case. And then, like right at the last minute, we got one, and I was 10 months pregnant and jumped up and down.
Oh,
So
that is so exciting.
it
Um,
was, yeah. I'm a huge fan, really.
yeah, well, with you being pregnant, like I didn't know that. Um, as you were writing the Book of Gothel, it's so interesting because so much of this novel is about um maternity, motherhood, um, being a caregiver, having a mother-daughter relationship where the mom is falling sick and dies. I mean, spoiler alert, but um, was like being pregnant during this process something that was really philosophically impacting you when you were writing this?
Actually, so I started the book um probably that was when we got the blurb from him. That was in 2021 or early 2022. And I was a full-time English professor, and this book was what I did. I was living in upstate Michigan, right on the Canadian border, and it was very cold. And this book is what I did at night while raising my first child. And so it was like it did have to do with motherhood. I lost my mother when I was young, and I wanted another child. So there's a lot of like personal factors figuring into the choice. But then the child that I was pregnant with, then that was like after the book had gone out on submission, after it had been bought and everything. It was
Mm.
my second kid.
Okay. Well, like let's start at the origin of, Once Upon a Time, which I know Stephen Sondheim with Into the Woods would love. Um, First I have to know, like, your fascination with, you said you really love the retellings of fairy tales, which like definitely comes through in the Book of Gothel. Um, but like what was your journey with fairy tales? Is this something that was implanted in your mind as a child? Like just you were always drawn to this kind of folklore fairy tale um magical element.
I grew up in a house by the woods, raised by hippie parents in South Louisiana, and my mother was a really big storyteller. And she told stories orally, and so she would tell us all kinds of fairy tales at bedtime, and some of them were things that she'd made up, and some of them were the classics. And then I remember like I used to take my brother and sister out behind the barn and tell them that this was the fairyland where all the flowers were, and I would have them go on this pretend elevator and close their eyes, and then when they opened them, we were in the land of the fairies, and that's like the environment that I grew up in. And then later, when I could read it, my dad gave me the Grimm's fairy tale books and all that. Like I read the Grimm's fairy tales before I watched the Disney versions. So yeah, it's been a lifelong love. And later in life, when I started reading the versions in picture books to my eldest child, I felt sort of, I mean, you have one experience with these stories as a child, and then when you come back to them as an adult, they're very problematic. Like the women are portrayed one way, the gender roles are very static and traditional. And I started to like, I was reading beautiful picture books, and I was like, this is this is I should change these. And so that's what I started doing. And then when my eldest went to bed, I started writing poems that retold them, and then a book that retold them. That was how it all got started.
Yeah. Well, and in preparation for talking with you, because I've always found Rapunzel a really interesting, um, again, like you said, the Grimm fairy tales are gothic, dark. Um, Cinderella, the stepsisters cut off their heel to try to fit into the shoe. Um, it's Hansel and Gretel. I mean, a witch who's going to try to bake you into cookies, and throw you in the oven is not a really exciting image that'll make you feel good. But I do think this like locked away symbolism of the tower. Like, I mean, I've always approached Rapunzel like with that almost Sigmund Freud psychoanalysis. Like, I know psychoanalysts have had a field day about like women being locked in a tower and they're like not having creative agency. And it's all about like puberty and they're going to, um, go to womanhood. So that's why she's in a tower. So I'm just like curious in preparation for retelling through the witch's perspective, though, and not centering on Rapunzel. Like, why Rapunzel, Mary? Like, what is the to you that sparked something creatively? It's officially beach season, which means I need all of my favorite Bath and Body products, but this time I need beachy scents. Well, my favorite Bath and Body boutique, the Soapbox NY, has me covered. From Farmhouse Fresh, my favorite company for all things face masks and retinol creams, to Finchberry, a beautiful bar of soap that looks like a slice of cake. I especially love the emerald one because it reminds me of the Wizard of Oz. I also love Wavertree in London. They have summer cocktail scents like peach Bellini, Prosecco, and so much more. They also have a blending bar with over 200 essential oils. So Janine, the co-owner, she knows my favorite scent is French vanilla and almond. So I've had the body wash, the bubble bath, the body lotion. If you don't live on Long Island, which I don't live on Long Island anymore, I still am getting my favorite products because the Soapbox NY has an extensive website as well as an Instagram and TikTok where you can place your orders by just DMing Janine. So if you do live on Long Island, definitely make a day trip out to Port Jefferson. It's a beautiful beach town. So you can follow the Soapbox NY on Instagram and TikTok. That's at the Soapbox NY. And you'll see all ways to contact them. I hope that you enjoy all of their products as much as I do. I mean, I now have gotten all my family and friends addicted to the Soapbox NY. So if I can get more of you out there addicted to their Bath and Body Boutique, the better. Hi, this is Dr. Andrew Rimby. And when I'm not here with a podcast microphone in the ITBR, I am consulting with several clients. I have small business clients where I provide them social media strategies. I have writing clients. I've worked on college admission essays. I've worked on a graduate student's thesis. I've worked on journal article editing. And I also have worked with those who are creating a podcast or who have a podcast on social media and ideas for how to get their podcast out there and trying to target their audience. So if you are interested in any of my consulting services, you can just reach out to me at ivorytowerboilerroom@gmail.com or search Ivory Tower Boiler Room on Google, and you will see my phone number. So feel free to give me a call. The first hour is $30, and then we'll figure out what plan works for you after that. Okay, now back to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room.
So the way this novel was born, I was writing another book, and in that other book, which is just in a drawer, um, a character opened a box that had an old manuscript in it, and um, as I was writing the scene, I got chills, and she didn't know it was in the box, and I didn't know it was in the box, and I didn't know it was in the manuscript. And so I just kind of like stopped everything and was like, I wonder what's in this thing. And I started like writing the manuscript itself. And the way that I write is that this is going to sound very out there, but once I get into a story, I basically, it's not like I hear a voice, but I'm sort of just like writing, like automatic writing a voice, you know? And so when I didn't know what I was writing, but I just wrote this, and she said, you have heard this story before. I was there when this happened. I was there when that happened, and it was all about, the shoe on the staircase, and all these different fairy tales, not just Rapunzel. It was like I was there when all this stuff happened, but it's all wrong. Like the way that it came down, everything has. It's been a. She didn't, she wouldn't use the phrase telephone game, but she was saying that, right? And then I, from that, after I wrote like 5,000 words of, not in one day, but I kept coming back to it after I wrote like 5,000 words of just spew. I was like, my goodness, this is a really great story. Forget that other book. I'm going to write this one. And let me see when in time this might have been, like before these stories were written down, and who this character could have been that interacted with these stories. And so then at that point, like after I had all this crazy nonsense, it wasn't very organized or anything. It was just this voice. I started to research it. And from there, it came out that I decided that she was the witch from Rapunzel. That was one of the things that she said. And the story developed organically from that experience. Um, and the beginning of the book, not the beginning of the book in the frame, but the beginning of the book where it says Mother Gothel, they call me. That was a much later kind of, once I had done more research, that was the sense that I put on it on
Yeah.
that crazy creative experience. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, your prologue surprised me in such an exciting way. Like every time a new chapter or a new moment began, Mary, you always took me literally like through the Black Forest in a different meandering path. I'm like, oh, it's gonna open with the witch, like from the tower. Like, I don't know how many people say to you that they're surprised that you really don't um get Mother Gothel right away. Like you get her mother. And like, was that something that was so important to you, is really getting that backstory before like jumping into why she's a witch and like giving her a lot of different humanistic traits?
Yeah. I mean, I think that I wanted to explore. I'm very interested in the history of magic and the history of witchcraft and the reasons why women and other people other marginalized people, all different kinds of people were accused of witchcraft, although they were predominantly women. But I'm really interested in the reasons why that happens. And so I there are Rapunzel retellings out there. I didn't really want to write straight at Rapunzel retelling. I wanted to tell the story of this person and how she might have become who she was. Um, so yeah, that was really important to me. And I think it's maybe more the publisher talked about it as if it was a Rapunzel retelling. I do think a lot of people expected that to be more front and center, but I think it's maybe more of an origin story that makes a little more sense. And it's not a villain origin story unless you put the villain in scare quotes, because she's not totally a villain. She's more of a heroine or a complicated character.
Yeah, like reading um Mother Gothel alongside, or I could say Hallow or Haelewise. Is that how you pronounce her name?
It's Haelewise.
Haelewise.
It's the Middle High German precursor to Heloise, the French name. So it's Heloise.
Okay, so even beginning in 1156, is that the Middle High German period?
Yeah, that's when that
Okay.
language was spoken. Yeah.
Okay. So that's like such an interesting time. Oh well, I was just gonna say it's a great companion to Alphaba and Wicked. But uh so the Middle High German period, was this like such an important point for you because of trying to start your frame narrative with this PhD scholar who like finds a manuscript and like would really be digging deep into the origin of fairy tales, which do have that Germanic root?
Yeah, so basically I needed to go before about, I think the first time Rapunzel shows up in written form is late 1300s or early 1400s. It's not the same as the story we know, but there's an earlier version that's there. And I wanted to go before that. And so what I ended up doing was, I'll be totally honest, I would so fairy tales aren't, they're not, a lot of the stories in here didn't originate in Germany. They come through France. They come through all different kinds of places. There's an early version of Cinderella that that is from China that probably came over to Europe on the Silk Road. So there's, it's been a long chain of us telling each other stories and changing them to fit with our cultures or to subvert our cultures. But like, so I tried to either take stories that would have already been there, but extrapolate like what the earlier versions would be, which I imagined maybe they had a little bit more agency. The women had a little bit more agency before they were written down by largely male group
Mm.
of writers. A lot of times, very Christian. A lot of history is Christian influenced, written by scribes, and so I was trying to imagine. That was an important thing to me about Haelewise, is that she was a peasant woman, somebody who is, outside that patriarchal tradition, and she's writing these down. So I'll be honest, I picked 1156 Germany because it would allow Haelewise to meet Hildegard of Bingen.
Uh,
I was I was trying to, I had like a viewfinder on history, right? And I was like, well, who could she meet? Like, how could she learn to how would she learn to read? How would she like interact? How would she learn who she is? Where would she go to try to like cure these spells that no one can explain in her period? And I'm a really huge medieval history nerd, and I've always been really fascinated by Hildegard, and all of her herbalism and her visions. And so anyway, so I kind of like thought, well, am I right here? I can do Hildegard, and I can have medieval Black Forest before it shrunk down to so the Black Forest used to be much larger. The forest that is now called, it used to stretch a lot further. So I imagined like what it would have been like at that time, and I was like, that'll be a really fun time to write. So I ended up setting it there.
well, and I love this time period because um, I took a European witchcraft history course, which shout out to Dr. Elizabeth Hyde, who was a wonderful instructor for it. But like I remember like before the witch trials that were predominantly in Europe, right? I mean, everyone always thinks of the Salem ones if you're in America just because of its proximity, but it's like, oh, those were small potatoes compared to what happened in Europe, especially in France. But like, I'm curious, that time period that was like so nicely situated because it's Middle Ages, like you almost are with dealing with the King Arthur fantasies, which has Guinevere, which kind of could be a fairy tale, but doesn't really get categorized. And like you even said, ancient Greek mythology even has fairy tale elements, but they don't tell like a moral lesson because they're not all wrapped up. So you didn't yet like have to deal with the witch hysteria of actually um the really harsh judgments, or not harsh judgments, but like you said, morality of religiosity. Like you didn't have to deal with the devils in Loudun or like actually convicting through the church as Catholicism would have it in that like later period with Shakespeare, like where your new book is going. But like so was there something like just really enticing also about that period of like not really having to deal with the weight of the witch trials.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, just like I'm fascinated with the stories of, how fairy tales changed over time, I'm also fascinated with how perceptions of magic change over time and perceptions of witchcraft and what makes a witch and what makes somebody just a religious healer like Hildegard, right? Like a lot of the Hildegard has a whole book full of basically herbal spells like, put this particular stone, wrap it in this herb, put it on your chest, wear it around your neck for 3 days, and then this will happen. Or you have to say certain things over, so that being able to, I'm really fascinated with that time because there's not a lot of records except for a few books where you have, bishops. There's one called The Confessor that is a bishop giving advice to priests about what do you do when a woman confesses to night flight. It's like flying on the backs of beasts and stuff. Like there's documentation like that, and but it's not. There's no court cases. There's no evidence, right? And so I've always wondered, like the women who were accused of witchcraft, clearly a lot of it was just a witch hunt, in the way we use the word, where, people who were um, poor and, a drain on the community, or people who had unexplained illnesses, or who had, things that we would now call mental health issues, or women who committed adultery. Like these are the kinds of people who were. But then there are some healers and herbalists. Like there was that going on too. And so this allowed me, the dark ages or the middle ages are really cool because there's not a lot there. And so you can kind of go, okay, well, this is what happened before, and this is what we know happens later, and maybe this is what happened between. And I was like, yeah, baby, I'm gonna write. I'm gonna write what could have happened, and that was a super lot of fun. And yes, it doesn't. The book doesn't have. She gets called a witch, and she gets kind of chased out of town, but she doesn't have to deal with this really organized, hellacious. I mean, what happened in Europe during the long centuries of witch persecution is really horrifying. And yeah, so there's, whatever happened in the Middle Ages, we don't quite know, but if there's a document that says, this is what you do if a woman confesses. I don't know if any woman ever confessed to that, but this is what you do if they confess. You give them this penance. Like it certainly doesn't seem that it was as horrifying as what would happen later.
Yeah. Well, did you read I think it's called Malleus Maleficorum?
Yeah,
Yeah, that's a lengthy document because I remember reading a lot of that
yeah,
in my research.
yeah, yeah. I had a lot. I've read a lot of. I had a lot of fun doing this research, just like seeing what people thought back then, like because a lot of it is really hard to wrap your brain around how anyone believed a lot of this stuff. But I have some books that have excerpts that are curated to teach you what people like the most compelling pieces that tell you what beliefs were in Germany at this time, or so I haven't read the whole thing, but I've looked at excerpts from it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'd love like for you to just speak about the like importance about the outsider aspect because I feel like your book is just so good at giving voice to the marginalized, especially like you've said. It's almost kind of reminds me of Carrie and like her marginalized powers in you don't take it in the horror realm like Stephen King does, but I do feel like even Carrie, I remember King one time in an interview saying that it's the inverted sense of Cinderella, Carrie. So like instead of the ball, you have the prom and it ends in like a bloody massacre. Um So it's like if the Brothers Grimm wanted to go all full throttle, I guess it would be a Carrie. But what is it about the outsider or the marginalized that speaks to witchcraft, fairy tales? Like they really do, give voice to those who are bullied or outsiders. After Pride Month is over, sometimes it can be hard to find our favorite LGBTQ books, TV shows, films, even theater experiences. Well, don't worry because I have the magazine for you. It is called The Gay and Lesbian Review, and their latest July and August issue just got released. It's called Sanctuary. Well, here is what editor Richard Snyder Jr. just described about the latest issue. He writes, the impulse for any minority to seek out safe spaces or sanctuaries exists in proportion to the oppression they suffer in their social world. From the catacombs of Rome to the colony of Plymouth, the upshot of this quest is well attested. Members of sexual minorities have undoubtedly been forming their own private communities for centuries. Would Plato's Symposium be an early example? But it was only in the 19th century that sexual identity became a criterion for forming associations of like minded individuals. Well, this issue has everything. An article about Andy Warhol's factory, an article about how Nantucket became a gay haven, how a lesbian art colony formed in St. Augustine, even how a gay bar in San Antonio fought back and won for recognition of the LGBTQ community. So, the ITBR is so excited to partner with the Gay and Lesbian Review, who is offering an exclusive discount code. Head on over to glreview.org, click subscribe, and enter the promo code ITBR50, that is ITBR50, to receive 50% off any print or digital subscription. And make sure you follow at the GL Review on Instagram to see all of their latest news. I hope you enjoy your reading. Were you a fan of the TCM Turner Classic Movie Network and you couldn't wait to see what classic movie they were going to premiere? And when you went to Hollywood/MGM studios in Disney World, you would always go to the Great Movie Ride. I absolutely loved the Great Movie Ride, especially when we landed in the Wizard of Oz scene and the Wicked Witch of the West came out from a heap of smoke and confronted Dorothy and Glinda. Well, I have a podcast for you. My good friend Christian Garcia's podcast is called That Old Gay Classic Cinema. So he combines classic cinema analysis with a queer study angle. So some of his recent episodes include Singing in the Rain, Breakfast at Tiffany's, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, Sunset Boulevard with our good friend Janine Cucci, the co-owner of the Soapbox NY. Alfred Hitchcock's Strangers on a Train, The Philadelphia Story, and so much more. You can listen to his podcast wherever you get your podcasts, like Apple or Spotify. And every Friday, I release a new That Old Gay Classic Cinema episode because he is now part of the ITBR network. I am now releasing his episodes on the ITBR podcast. So make sure that you have a listen because I was on his first episode talking all things The Sound of Music, which, if you didn't know, I was Captain Von Trapp when I was in high school. So make sure you follow him on TikTok and Instagram at That Old Gay Classic Cinema and rate, subscribe, do all the things, and please help support my friend Christian's podcast. I know you're going to love it.
Yeah, I mean, so the question is like, what is it that not just fairy tales, but what else did you say gives voice to the outsiders?
Well, so fairy tales or even just I'm trying to well, I guess just we can go with fairy tales, Mary. Like what is it about them that just really speaks to outsiders?
Okay, well, I mean, I feel like not all fairy tales, but a large portion of them really. at least the versions that we have, really don't give a lot of voice to marginalized characters. Like the women, Rapunzel is trapped in the tower. The witch is villainized. It's really interesting if you look at Rapunzel over time. The word for the witch changes from in the earliest version we have, she's an ogress. Wait, no, she's in the earliest version, she's a sorceress, and then she's an ogress, and then she's a witch.
Mm,
And so there's, like these, maybe these earlier versions are, and actually in the earliest version, it's a little more kind to her, to the witch character than it is that. But in the versions we have, the witch is an old woman, so she's bad, and she
mm,
wants to steal a child. She's like the witch in Hansel and Gretel. She doesn't have any explanation for why she did it. And I think that's what draws me to fairy tales, in the sense that these are the stories that we tell our kids and that our kids grow
mm.
up becoming obsessed with, right? Like, um, I want to be Rapunzel, and one day my prince will come, right? And so that's sort of, I'm really interested in going into stories and upending them in a way that says, this is the way you've heard it, but there's got to be another side. It's not being fair to these characters, and inhabiting a perspective that's glossed over or ignored and isn't complicated in a way that it should be.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that you dismantled my question, which is great because it's actually like I think what you got us to is like maybe my question actually is why is there such a large fan base of marginalized people who are drawn to fairy tales? Because I
Oh,
actually think maybe it's not the fairy tale itself, it's the community who kind of is like a cult community, a la Rocky Horror Picture Show, who are just
uh-huh.
really drawn to The Wizard of Oz or Snow White or, you know, um, Rapunzel. Like they're drawn to these figures, maybe because of what the figures, how they've interpreted them for feeling trapped. So maybe they see themselves as being bullied and these characters are bullied.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think so. For me personally, I was really bullied as a kid. I always felt really different. I'm neurodivergent. I'm bisexual. Like there's a lot of things about my personal experience where I just feel like an outsider all the time. And so I've never really thought about fairy tales as a genre as specifically speaking to me for that reason, except for there's an escapist factor to them. Like there's that. But
Mhm.
I always have really been fascinated. Like I'm always fascinated with these powerful women witch characters. And I think that's kind of a when you're looking at these stories and there's all these, you know, perfect, humble, beautiful women who get what they want. If you're a girl looking at that, and then you see these like witches that are really powerful, that for me, that I think I'm drawn to those outsider characters who have power in the stories, and then I want to like dismantle them and go like, oh, but they weren't that bad.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
They were
yeah.
just powerful and you know condemned for it.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because you're having me like reflect, especially having dug so deep into your prose, which Mary's prose is just, it's so lush. There's just so much to the nuance of psychology that you're doing here that I appreciate so much, Mary. Um, that like reality TV in our current day actually to me is kind of the boxed in fairy tale. Like our visual social media, like Hollywood comparisons. I'm like, oh, that's the Rapunzel. Like that's who they want, people to look like or aspire to be. The Real Housewives, like they're trapped in a way. Um, so which is interesting, but is right. Reality TV should reflect like all of our psychological nuance, but you know. It's a soap opera. Um, and like I am curious, what do you think of like were there any resonances in current culture of maybe even fascination with the Wiccan faith or craft being embraced as a movie? You know, are there any ways that witchcraft is now seen almost as a commodity of sorts, like in shops and I would say accepted, but it's almost become like a tourist industry that you
Yeah,
were reflecting on.
I'm a little bit put off by, or I guess I'm pretty put off by like the commodification of witchcraft. Like, but I don't think that the book is a response to that or is something that I'm engaging with intentionally. I'll be totally honest. I was raised Catholic. I was a lapsed Catholic, and then my spirituality now is like super. I was agnostic for a while, and then it's super complicated. Like you don't want to hear about it, but I will say that I have a personal interest in witchcraft and herbalism and a lot of the stuff that's explored in the book. And I think that's maybe I know that there was one review that came out right after the book was published where they were saying that oh look, here's a tower where women can go and get help if they need an abortion, and at that time that was right whenever all the states had started, legalizing abortion, illegalizing abortion, and so that it I think it speaks to people because of that um, now, but it was I mean I started it back in 20 that first scene that I wrote with the box. I think it was 2013, like the winter of
Oh,
2013, so a long, long time ago. And I've been, I was a baby goth in the 90s. I saw the craft when it came out, and it was a big thing for me. Again, because of that empowering aspect. Like it's a when you feel like you're an outsider and you're put upon and you don't have power, and then you see a powerful outsider, no matter how they got that power, it's still empowering. um so yeah, I'm glad that it's resonating with people for that, but it's a little probably just a little more personal than it is political, although it's still political because it's personal, right?
yeah. Well, like I feel as we're nearing the end of our conversation, I have to ask you about the fabled tower, um, you know, of Gothel and just like the safe haven. I'm not going to give too much away, but I think we could say a safe haven for the outsiders who are women and misunderstood. Um, in a way, it's almost kind of like the opposite of the Handmaid's Tale. Like instead of women being thrown into dystopia, they're actually finding utopia in the tower. Um, so like what were maybe some like where did you draw some inspiration for how you're going to configure the fabled tower? Since that is like I think when people think of Rapunzel, they're thinking there's a tower. Like even if they don't really know all
Right.
the ins and outs, they know that there's a tower and that there's going to be hair that falls from it.
Right. So what do you mean, like how to configure it? What exactly are you asking?
Yeah, so like what kind of inspiration or resources were you really relying on to like think about a safe haven for, Haelewise and all of like the women she'll encounter there?
When you say resources, what are you asking? Are you talking about research, or are you talking like inspiration for the idea of the tower?
Exactly. Yeah. Like, was there anything
Okay.
in your mind that you were turning to for
Oh.
inspiration? While it's still summer, and I hope so many of you out there are enjoying beach days, I know that while I'm at the beach, I'll have a thought pop into my mind like, wait, What am I going to assign on my syllabus? What books do I want my students to read? I know if you are a college educator listening right now, or a student, or someone who just really enjoys and values academic writing and academic topics, I have a press that you need to know about. It's called Broadview Press, and it's an independent press. I've had a few of their writers on the podcast, including Dr. Sid Dobrin, who was recently on the podcast to talk about how artificial intelligence is changing the game for humanities education. Soon, I'm going to have Dr. Andrea Sullivan Clark on to talk all about philosophies on Turtle Island, especially indigenous philosophies. And what does she think about how pop culture looks at Native American narratives? If you are looking for a text to assign your students in the humanities classroom, Broadview Press has you covered. They have a book that just came out called Academic Writing Now, a brief guide for busy students. It is designed to cover the basics of a college writing course in a concise, student-friendly format. Each chapter concentrates on a crucial element of composing an academic essay. It is available as an ebook for under $30, and it includes readings on contemporary issues like AI, climate change, and campus life. I'm so excited because Broadview Press has released an exclusive discount code, Ivory Tower, for 20% off your broadviewpress.com order. That's Ivory Tower for 20% off. Make sure you follow them on Instagram at Broadview Press. Enjoy all of your reading.
Okay, yeah. So obviously the tower in the story, and then the way that the story works is it's all about, here's the fable or the fairy tale that we know now. What could it have been in the past? And there's magic in the story, obviously, but I like magic that is, this story is, I tried to make it so much historical realism, but then like this magic is kind of like slow burn building throughout. Like people talk about slow burn romance. Well, it's slow burn magic. That's what happens in the story. Like it slowly comes out bit by bit. Is it real or isn't it? And so I looked at architectural examples. I went, so I got a grant to go to Germany while I was writing the book. And I, I visited the modern day Abbey of Hildegard of Bingen, and I went to the ruins of the old abbey that she used to have. And I saw what structures would have looked like. And I guess I wanted to, when I think about how I did it, I wanted to make it real, you know. And when I was in Bingen, I wandered into the way in the place where Hildegard's Abbey was in Bingen. It it's it's called, the neighborhood is Rupertsburg. That's where it used to be. But then right now the whole abbey was the old abbey was destroyed, and all that's left are these cellars that are under the buildings that are there. And so I wandered into an actual cellar that was there. And I guess, like, if I talk about my inspiration, it's like I wanted to make it real. I wanted to find these historical places. I wanted to do that because um, instead of it being a place for trapping a woman, I wanted to invert it and explain, why would Mother Gothel have kept Rapunzel there, and I turned it in, instead of a trap, I turned it into something empowering.
Yeah, well, if I ever teach a fairy tale course, I'm definitely teaching your novel alongside of American Horror Story Coven, because I feel like there's a lot of interesting, empowering narratives that you could like draw from that. Um, so like before I talk about or have you talk and tease A Rose by Any Other Name, I was gonna say I don't know everything that's in your narrative because it hasn't come out yet, but I am just curious about, like, with the Book of Gothel, how in a publishing, maybe this might be a publishing question more so than like your narrative, but how much were you thinking about the tone? Like this is an adult novel of historical realism and not a young adult novel. Like to you, for you, was there a real difference when you were writing?
Okay, so real fast. When I first wrote that first draft of the book, there was the 12th century narrative, and then there was this whole story about the professor and her estranged girlfriend who, and there was this whole, modern narrative that went with it. And the book was much longer. Um, and I don't think I got it. I couldn't have got, I tried and tried and tried to make it work where it bounced back and forth between the two. And I couldn't get it to where it would work. And it was only after I pulled off that, they were adult, like they were in their 60s, these women.
Oh wow.
Um, and so it was not originally conceived as a young adult novel, but I tried to find agents for it and stuff, and it didn't work. And so it was only, and I don't know if that's a problem with the publishing industry or anything. It might just be a problem with me that's really hard to do, like bounce back and forth between a modern and a that. But anyway, one of the feedback pieces that I got is that 12th century part's really good. So I was like, well, okay. So I wrote a version that just had like a scholarly preface, and then I had footnotes on it. And it was just the manuscript itself. And that's what I found an agent with. And then it was my current editor who was like, we need to make that a scene instead of like a scholarly thing. And so that's the story of how it happened. So no, I wasn't thinking of it at all like adult versus young adult or anything like that. It was only once I got into the publishing process and my agent was saying, oh, this has, YA crossover potential. And they started, throwing all these business words at me. But yeah, that it wasn't on my mind while I was writing. Only when I turned around and tried to sell it.
Yeah, like once the marketing took over.
Right, right.
Um, so okay, well, everyone, as I turn to a rose by any other name, first, please get your hands on the Book of Gothel. I have a link in the show notes for the podcast. Uh, Also, the audiobook is incredibly well done. So, yeah, listen, read it. But Mary, I would just love if you could tease or talk about how you went from the Book of Gothel to your new book coming out, which when does it come out again?
So, A Rose by Any Other Name comes out this July, on July 16th in the US and July 18th in the UK. Um, yeah,
And so its premise is really taking up that dark lady figure from Shakespeare's sonnets.
sure. Yeah. So, it is the story behind the sonnets. The Whenever I sold the Book of Gothel, they asked me. It was a two-book deal, and they asked me what I wanted the second book to be. And I have wanted to write the Dark Lady book since I was about 21.
Oh,
I'm a huge Shakespeare fan, but the sonnets, a lot of the fair use sonnets are really, really beautiful, and there's some Dark Lady sonnets that seem really sincere. But a lot of them infuriate me because there's this very deep thread of misogyny in them. And I have always wanted to tell that story and sort of subvert it in the same way that I wanted to subvert fairy tales. And I love the stories behind stories, and I love thinking about like how somebody's perspective can bias something that really happened. So um, for that book, what I got to do is I got to read the sonnets all the way through. I read a lot of literary criticism. I read several different books of the sonnets. Don Patterson has this amazing version where he goes through the sonnets one by one and kind of like just in a vernacular like talks about them and what he thinks of them. And he's my favorite critic of the sonnets. He's probably also the most accessible, but so I took notes on the story of what happened, and how there's 18 sonnets in the beginning that are basically about the speaker trying to convince this young man to marry and procreate. And then it jumps into these gorgeous, I think it's about 116, something like that, sonnets toward this young man. And it's like slowly and slowly it becomes really clear that Shakespeare is beautifully in love with this man and a little bit tortured, a lot tortured about it. And there's this rival poet who shows up that the speaker is kind of like vying with for the fair
Mm.
youth's attention. And then the latter, there's only 26 Dark Lady sonnets. Most of it is all about that fair youth. And then, he talks about her for 26 sonnets. And then there's a coda at the end of a couple. But like, I wanted to, and he does a lot of things for the Dark Lady. He accuses her of giving both him, I'm going to say Shakespeare, because the whole thing is based on the premise of it's not made up. It's based on, the book goes with that. It's like, okay, there's this huge debate. A lot of scholars want to say they didn't have anything to do with Shakespeare's life. They're a response to the poetry that was written then. But for centuries, there's been theories about who these people were and what really happened. So I went with a lot of those theories that people have proposed over the years. So I get to invent the Dark Lady. He accuses her of giving them venereal disease, both him and the fair youth. He accuses her of maybe even having power from the devil. Like there's a lot of stuff that there's some very dark accusations going on in there. So the inspiration for the novel was like, well, man, what if this was a real person, and what would she have to deal with if her identity came out, right? So it's the story of why she ends up in London. It's the story. It's kind of a mirror of the sonnet. So she has this friend turned lover of her own, just like Shakespeare has the fair youth, and it's the story of how she gets involved with him as she's trying to find a way to become financially independent and not have to marry, not have to be dependent on a man. So that's the frame for the story, and she gets accused of witchcraft early on. It was a dream come true to write, and it was so much fun. It's 14 chapters with 10 scenes in each chapter, so it's like it's a sonnet, but it's
Oh,
prose. I just had a ball. It was wonderful.
yeah. Well, I can't wait to read it. I can't wait for everyone who's listening to this to get their hands on it in July. Um, how can everyone follow you on social media, Mary?
The best way is on Instagram. I'm just Mary McMyne, all one word. It'd be wonderful if you followed me there. Um, I'm sort of moving away from Twitter, but I'm the same on all accounts. So I'm also on Twitter and I'm on Threads too. And if you
Okay.
go to my website, which is marymcmyne.com, I have a newsletter there as well.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. So thank you so much, Mary. This was just such a pleasure. I
Yeah.
love chatting with you and, diving deeper into Gothel and the universe of it.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Okay. Bye, Mary.
Bye.